It was supposed to be a story about heroes, but what if the real story is about something far more uncomfortable: money, power, and a growing whisper that refuses to stay quiet? Because right now, the name that once stood as a symbol of hope is suddenly at the center of a storm that feels too loud to ignore and too precise to be accidental.
Harry's heartbreak as the showbiz elite dump the Sussexes.
But is it really a charity project at all?
The wounded veterans reportedly covered their own flights, paid for their own hotel rooms, and even funded some of their own equipment, while the biggest names linked to the event were reportedly surrounded by private travel, luxury arrangements, and 5-star accommodation. And that's before getting to the figure that some reports claim was never meant to attract this level of public attention. And just like that, the narrative begins to crack. Because how does a story that starts with sacrifice slowly shift into something that feels unequal? How does a platform built on honoring wounded warriors end up raising questions about who was really benefiting behind the scenes? It doesn't happen overnight. It builds quietly, piece by piece, detail by detail, until suddenly people stop clapping and start asking.
I don't think a lot of veterans actually are devastated. The reality is, if you go deeper into Invictus, a lot of veterans are actually more upset, asking where all the money actually goes to.
It all starts with a petition, because that's the issue putting Prince Harry under serious scrutiny right now. A petition is reportedly gaining momentum with one direct demand: remove Prince Harry from the Invictus Games, not restructure the organization, not conduct an internal review, remove him entirely. And the people backing it insist they are not attacking veterans. They say they're speaking up on behalf of them. That's what makes this controversy stand out so much. Read that again. Not reform, not review. Removal, that's not a small complaint, that's a full-blown rupture. And when people say they're doing it for the veterans, that's when it stops being noise and starts sounding like something deeper, something emotional, something personal. Because behind every number, every report, every polished speech there are real people. And some of those people are now saying they had to pay their own way.
Oh, the Invictus Games, it's great, it does all this. And then, you know, you start looking into it and you're like, hey, what the heck is going on here? You know, those 535 competitors had to pay their own way. They had to pay their own housing for the games. They had to pay for their own equipment. And Harry and Meghan got a really nice vacation out of it, with lots of adorational speeches and clapping and crowds gathered for them.
They had to pay their own housing for the games. They had to pay for their own equipment. And Harry and Meghan got a really nice vacation out of it, with lots of adorational speeches and clapping and crowds gathered for them. At the same time, according to reports citing a source said to be connected to Invictus, the royal family has allegedly reached a decision regarding the upcoming Birmingham launch next month. Reports suggest no senior royals are expected to attend. Not King Charles, not Prince William, not Princess Catherine, and suddenly the silence gets louder. No senior royals, not even symbolic support. In a system where presence is everything, absence becomes a statement, a calculated one. And people notice patterns. They always do.
A growing scandal involving Prince Harry and his last remaining genuine charity project, the Invictus Games. But is it really a charity project at all?
The charity initiative, once praised as Harry's greatest success and often viewed as one of his most positive achievements, now appears to be facing pressure from every angle. So what's causing all this concern? Critics point to the financial reports, and they argue the numbers raise even more questions than anyone expected. Because numbers don't lie, but they can confuse. And when they confuse, people dig. And when people dig, they don't stop at the surface.
I think that will be the beginning of the end for Meghan as a public figure, because this is a man that she's abandoned.
Inspiring mission with a powerful purpose. But attention quickly shifted to the reported cost, $63.2 million. That breaks down to roughly $118,000 per competitor. Let that sink in. $118,000 per competitor for an event rooted in recovery, resilience, and rebuilding lives. So the obvious question starts echoing everywhere: why does it cost so much? Now compare that to similar events. The Warrior Games in the United States, which also supports wounded service members through athletic competition, reportedly operates on around $2 million per year. In Germany, a comparable event was reportedly held for about $200,000 with roughly half as many participants. That's why people are looking at those numbers and asking a simple question. If the mission is so similar, why is the price tag so much higher? That's where the real debate starts. And that question, it doesn't go away. It multiplies. It spreads. Because once you start comparing, once you start noticing differences, differences, once the illusion of uniformity breaks, you begin to wonder what else isn't lining up. Approximately $15 million from the Canadian federal government and another $15 million from British Columbia. Public money, government backing, large sums moving through systems most people will never fully see. And when the trail gets complicated, when it stops being direct, when it starts looping through corporations and licensing structures, that's when suspicion quietly steps in. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make people pause. And here's the thing about pauses. They stretch. They turn into doubt. And doubt, that's where everything changes. Because this is no longer just about an event. It's no longer just about image. It's about trust. And right now, that trust feels like it's being tested from every single direction, with more questions forming than answers being given. And if this is only the beginning, what happens when the deeper layers start coming into focus? And that's where the story takes a darker turn. Because once people start following the money, they don't just stop at totals, they start dissecting movements, patterns, and decisions that suddenly don't feel as innocent as they once did. Reports begin surfacing about how funds are allocated, how grants are reduced, and how at the exact same time income appears to rise. That contrast, sharp, almost contradictory, becomes impossible to ignore. Because when support for veterans reportedly drops while reserves grow and executive roles expand, people don't see balance. They see imbalance. An imbalance in a charity? That's where suspicion doesn't just grow, it accelerates. Now add another layer to this already complicated picture. Legal fees reportedly jumping dramatically in a single year without clear explanation. A for-profit company receiving funds with little detail about its purpose. Even something as basic as conflicting registration numbers appearing in official filings. Small details? Maybe. But when multiple small details start stacking on top of each other, they stop looking small. They start forming a pattern. And patterns, they're what turn curiosity into full-blown scrutiny. Then comes the argument that sounds good on paper, 92% of funds going toward charitable activities. It sounds impressive, clean, reassuring, but then the definition shifts. Because charitable activities doesn't just mean direct help to veterans. It includes running the games themselves, venues, production, travel, logistics. And suddenly, the question becomes unavoidable. How much of that money is truly reaching the people it was meant for, and how much is simply sustaining the machine around them? That's the line that divides opinion right down the middle. On one side, supporters insisting the games inspire, uplift, and create visibility for wounded service members. On the other, critics asking whether inspiration alone justifies the scale of spending. And right in the middle of that divide, silence from key figures that only seems to make everything louder. Because while all of this unfolds, another narrative quietly fuels the fire, the image of luxury. Private jets, high-end accommodations, expensive wardrobes. Whether every detail is accurate or not almost becomes irrelevant because perception has already taken hold. And perception, especially in moments of economic strain, is powerful. When people are struggling, when taxpayers are watching where every pound or dollar goes, even the suggestion of extravagance tied to a charity becomes explosive. And then there's the sponsorship question. Once strong, now seemingly uncertain. Big names stepping back, contracts not renewed, fewer corporate partners stepping forward. It doesn't go unnoticed because companies don't just walk away without reason. And when they do, people start asking the same uncomfortable question again and again: what changed? At the same time, government funding continues to flow, with millions committed despite financial pressures elsewhere. That's where frustration peaks, because for many observers, it begins to look like public money is filling gaps that private confidence no longer wants to cover. And that's not just a financial issue, it's a reputational one. But maybe the most unsettling part of all isn't the numbers, the sponsors, or even the headlines. It's the growing feeling that the focus has shifted, that what started as a mission centered on veterans is now being overshadowed by something else entirely: celebrity, image, controversy, a slow transformation that no one officially announced, but everyone seems to sense. And as this pressure builds, another question quietly emerges behind closed doors, one that no one seems ready to answer out loud. Is the problem something that can be fixed, or has it already gone too far? Because the petition is still gaining traction. The scrutiny isn't slowing down. The doubts are multiplying. And with every passing moment, the story becomes less about what the games were meant to be and more about what they've become. So now everything points to one looming moment: Birmingham, a stage that was supposed to represent unity, resilience, and triumph. But instead, it feels like a a test of credibility, a test of trust, a test of whether this entire narrative can be turned around or whether it will finally unravel in full public view. Because here's the truth no one can ignore anymore. Showing up is no longer enough. Not when the questions are this loud, not when the spotlight is this unforgiving, and definitely not when the world is no longer just watching the games, but watching everything behind them. And as the countdown to Birmingham continues, one thought lingers in the air. Heavier than anything else, what if the real challenge isn't what happens on the field, but what happens when all the unanswered questions finally demand an answer?